still play day, pay. Before I craft the spot, stay at home a lot. Cause when I run the plots that I'm known to concoct, can hear the screams of fools when I fall them rocks. Elven ladies, they pay homage, but players say, hey fellow, how? My last game was supersonic. How they wondering if I still got it? They say the game's changed, they wanna know what I think about it.
If you ain't rolling dice,
Game Master A's the name and I'm running this game. Still reading the splat, still planning attacks, still not wanting your crap.
Hello, and welcome to the second episode of THACA, or if you would prefer, to hit armor class awesome. This episode is going to be about the Paladin paradox. A Paladin in D&D, pretty much every iteration of D&D, has to maintain a certain level of his alignment. We talked about chaotic neutral last time. A paladin, in order to be a paladin, has to maintain a lawful good alignment. He can't be neutral good, he can't be chaotic good. He has to be lawful good. It's very hard at times to maintain that particular alignment. That alignment has conflicts at times. I know in AD&D, in order to be a paladin, you had to have very specific stat arrays. You had to have good strength, like a 12 in strength. You had to have at least a 9 in constitution and a 17 in charisma, which is a lot. When a party's getting together, and when a player group is making their characters, usually you can account for one person being like, I think I want to be a paladin. It's usually not a first-time player who's ready to shoulder that burden, because it's a tough one to do. Paladins don't generally adventure with thieves, for example, rogues. They probably have a problem with that, and usually in a gaming group, alignments kind of go all over the place. There's people who are like, again, there's people who are lawful neutral, people who want to go chaotic neutral, people who want to go true neutral, chaotic good, whatever. But if you have a rogue in the party, in the same party as a paladin, you kind of have to make a backstory as to why those two guys are adventuring together. Because a paladin usually doesn't throw his lot in with rogues, because rogues tend to be fast and loose with their code of honor, if you will. So that's one thing to get past. But the Paladin paradox, as I have come to know it as, kind of plays out in a manner like this. Let's say that the party is adventuring wherever in the local kingdom. They're going along, boop, 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 and they come across a couple of soldiers. If there's a war going on or something, there's a couple of soldiers in there escorting these like prisoners of war or criminals or whatever to the nearest town to be judged for their crimes. That in and of itself is like, the party sees them, and the paladin, that's no problem. Paladin's like, yeah, they're doing their job, good. They're still within eyeshot of the prisoner and the guys who are taking them to wherever they're taking them to. And one of the jailers, if you will, decides to strike the prisoner. Now that's when the paladin, if the paladin sees that, he kind of stops and he just goes, wait a second. Before it was like, okay, the guy's enforcing the law by, taking this captured prisoner to whatever. Now the jailer is actively abusing his power. The paladin stops, and then the party has to stop. traditionally speaking. Someone may go like, ah, fuck, like, and keep walking, but the paladin stops, and he goes up to the jailers, and he puts his fucking fists on his hip, and he's looking at him like, chest puffed out and shit, and he goes like, "Excuse me, sirs, but it appears to me that you are violating certain tenets of your position." That's what he would do. He would stop and he would say something. Now the other party members have to stop or not stop, but they're probably going to stop and see how this plays out, because it's kind of interesting. And let's say that the jailers are like, "Oh, he's what? He's just a prisoner. Oh," he's like fucking hits him again. Like, "Yeah, that's what I do." Yeah. I don't know why they're Cockney. They just happen to be from Liverpool or something. I don't fucking know. So they keep, if I would do this as a DM, I would have them continue to abuse the prisoner. Now the paladin has to act. Now, when I play a paladin is one of my favorite classes, because of this like kind of conflict and complexity that goes with them. As a paladin, if I were playing the paladin, I would probably do that whole, I did the chest puffing thing, I did the, fists on my hips, and now if I saw them strike again, I would say, "Excuse me, sirs, but if you do that once more, I'm afraid that I'm gonna have to take action." Maybe the DM would go like, make an intimidation roll, make a diplomacy roll, make a charisma check, maybe. But if I were the DM and the paladin said this, I would want to see how far this paladin's willing to go. So again, the jailers would just be like, "Oh, up yours, you shiny twat," or something like that. You clinkety cunt. They say that, and then they smack the guy again. And now the paladin jumps into action. A couple things that a paladin should really have to consider before he does this is that he's lawful good, obviously, and he's doing this for what he perceives to be the greater good. However, he's not exactly thinking straight either, and there are other people in his group. The rogue, for example. Let's say the rogue is true neutral or something, and even before this whole melee breaks out, he goes up, "Hey, Paladin, hey, Paladin, I know that look in your eyes, I know what you're thinking, and I've seen that look before, you shouldn't do this is real dumb." But of course the paladin has to ignore that, because the paladin is acting according to his moral beliefs and ethical beliefs. Therefore, he kind of just, shrugs the rogue aside, and he's like, "No, it's on." So he's in a fight now. And really, and he's potentially dragging other people into the fight, which is tough. It's paradoxical. He doesn't mean for them to be drawn into the fight. He's really only considering himself the one who's going to be fighting. But if there's a neutral good person in the group, maybe a bard or chaotic good, if there's a barbarian who has good leanings or whatever, the chaotic neutral character is probably too busy observing a fucking monarch butterfly to even realize what the fuck's going on. You probably don't have to worry about him or her. But so now the paladin's fighting. Now if the paladin wins the fight, which it's likely because paladins are pretty beefy characters in general, he's beaten the guys. Now he has the prisoner. The prisoner's there. The prisoner never left. And now this is where the paradox kind of kicks back in because the Paladin can't leave the prisoner there. He can't do it. It's just not, that is not a good act. You can't, and also it's not a lawful act to leave a criminal, no matter how small his crime may have been, to just leave him there and let him go, which might be the suggestion of the true neutral rogue, who's like, well, we saved him, you know, why don't we just, you know, fucking let him go or some shit, like, I don't fucking want to take care of this motherfucker, like, just let him go. Or the neutral good bard who might be like, oh, well, you know, he told me that the only crime he was guilty of was stealing a loaf of bread. Perhaps we should just let him go. The Paladin would be the one that goes like, no, he has to go with us. Which is, yet again, he's making this decision, or he or she is making this decision, and it affects the entire party. Because the entire party now is responsible for this prisoner that they have to take to wherever he was supposed to go. Which is probably found out before they, you know, dispatch the unfair, bastardly jailers who they just dispatched. So now the Paladin has to undertake that burden, as well as the entire party. That seems like a selfish act. It seems like a lawful good act on the part of the Paladin, but it's also selfish that he's not thinking about the other party members who are now also burdened with this person. The way I get around that as a Paladin, if I were playing this Paladin, is simple, really. I mean, you just gotta look at the party members, roll, you know, in RP mode or whatever, and you go, okay, I understand. This is my fault. This is my battle or whatever. I'll look after the prisoner. He's my responsibility. I'll give him my food. I'll let him sleep in my tent. I'll let him sleep in my knapsack. I'll sleep on the ground or something. That kind of balances out the inherent selfishness of what he just did. But there are other, like, I think the most complicated character is that of the Lawful Good Paladin, because he's kind of just a walking set of contradictions. He's a master at arms, but he's a pacifist. He's supposed to be a pacifist. He's a warrior, priest. So is a cleric technically, but the Paladin is much more of a knightly warrior than anybody else. That's kind of the role he fits in. But he's trained to kill. He's also trained not to utilize, like, using his martial prowess as the last resort. In that sense, he's kind of like a Jedi Knight or something like that. But I think there's always ways to balance that out. You know, there's always ways to make it so that the Paladin is still being lawful good and carrying out his duties without, you know, hoisting the burden on everybody else. I'm gonna have to cut it short. I'm gonna have to cut it now because it's already a little too long. So that was this episode. I'll see you next time.
I'm representing for the players all across the world.
Still
Killing kobolds with my claymore, girl.
Still taking time to perfect the sheep, and I still got love for the feats. It's the D&D.
I'm representing for the players all across the world.
Still
Killing kobolds with my claymore, girl.
Still taking time to perfect the sheep, and I still got time for the feats. It's the D&D. Since the last time I rolled to see, I lost some friends. Well, hell, me and T, we splunking again.